The smell hit Dani's nostrils at exactly 9:47 p.m. on a humid Miami night, and she had 3 seconds to decide if she was about to die. That acrid, petroleum-sweet stench. She knew it the way you know your own name, the way you know the scent of your mother's perfume or the smell of rain before it falls. Except this smell meant fire. This smell meant death. It was the same smell that had filled her father's auto shop 4 years ago, right before the explosion that turned him into a closed-casket funeral. Dani was 15 years old, 127 pounds, and living in a cardboard shelter behind Hangar 7 of Miami Executive Airport. She had no business being on the tarmac. She had no business seeing what she was seeing, flames licking from the intake cowling of a Gulfstream G650, its engines spooling up for takeoff, its fuselage gleaming under the floodlights like a $40 million death trap. And she definitely had no business sprinting toward it. But that's exactly what she did. What happened in the next 3 seconds would save 11 lives, expose a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of aviation security, and bind a homeless teenager to a billionaire in a way that would transform both of their futures forever. This is the story of how the most powerless person at an airport became the only one who could prevent a catastrophe, and how her courage revealed a pattern of sabotage that authorities had been missing for 18 months. But to understand why Dani recognized that smell, why she moved when everyone else froze, and why what seemed like a miracle was actually the culmination of trauma, instinct, and impossible odds, we need to go back. Back to before the explosion, back to when Dani Reeves still had a home. Dani Reeves' childhood ended on a Tuesday. She was 11 years old, sitting in Mrs. Patterson's 6th grade classroom at Booker T. Washington Middle School, conjugating verbs she'd never use when Principal Vasquez appeared in the doorway. Dani saw it in his eyes before he said a word, the way adults look at children when they're about to deliver news that can't be unsaid. Her father, Marcus Reeves, was dead. The official report called it an industrial accident, a fuel line rupture at Reeves Auto Repair on Northwest 62nd Street. An ignition source, probably a cigarette, though her father had quit smoking 2 years prior. An explosion. Marcus Reeves, age 38, pronounced dead at the scene. What the report didn't mention was the smell. Dani had been to her father's shop countless times. She knew every sound, every scent, every rhythm of that place. She knew the difference between transmission fluid and brake fluid by smell alone. She knew which ratchet had the loose grip, which bay had the best light, which customer paid cash and which paid late. And she knew her father had been worried about something in the weeks before he died. "Baby girl," he'd told her one night while they shared Chinese takeout in his cluttered office. "Sometimes things ain't what they seem. Sometimes people make things look like accidents." She was 11. She didn't understand. "What do you mean, Daddy?" He'd smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Nothing, baby. Just, you ever smell something wrong? Something off? You trust that feeling. Your nose knows things your brain hasn't figured out yet." 3 weeks later, he was gone. The insurance company paid out $50,000, barely enough to cover the funeral, and 6 months of rent for Dani and her mother, Shanice. But grief does strange things to people. Shanice Reeves, who'd been a medical billing specialist at Jackson Memorial, started missing work. Then missing days. Then missing weeks. By the time Dani turned 12, her mother was missing altogether, lost to whatever darkness swallows people who can't carry the weight of loss. Dani entered the foster system in September 2021. She lasted in 3 different homes over the next 2 years. The first family was kind but overwhelmed. 7 kids in a 3-bedroom house in Liberty City. The second home had a foster father whose eyes lingered too long, whose hands reached too far. Dani left in the middle of the night with nothing but a backpack and her father's old work jacket. The third placement lasted 4 months before budget cuts closed the agency that ran it. By October 2023, at age 14, Dani Reeves was officially homeless, but she wasn't helpless. Most people think homelessness means sleeping on downtown sidewalks pushing shopping carts, begging for change at traffic lights. That's the visible homeless, the ones society has decided to notice. Dani became invisible. She learned this from Mr. Chen, a 60-year-old former engineer who lived in a carefully constructed shelter behind a FedEx depot. The secret, he told her, is looking like you belong. Clean clothes, clean face, somewhere to go. Nobody questions a kid with a backpack if they look like they're heading to school. So that's what Dani did. She found a 24-hour gym, $19.99 a month, paid with cash from returning shopping carts and aluminum cans, where she could shower. She kept her clothes in a rented locker at the Greyhound station. She learned which McDonald's had the most indifferent managers, which libraries stayed open latest, which churches offered free meals without requiring a sermon. And she found Miami Executive Airport, TMB, the locals called it, a small public airport wedged between Interstate 826 and Northwest 107th Avenue, catering to private jets, flight schools, and charter operations. Not the glittering, secured fortress of MIA where commercial flights departed. This was the airport for people who had their own planes or worked on them. Dani discovered it by accident, following a bus route to its terminus. She'd been looking for a quiet place to sleep, somewhere away from the dangers that hunted young girls on Miami streets after dark. What she found was an education. TMB had security, but it was porous. The fence line ran through dense vegetation. The maintenance hangars operated 24/7, with mechanics coming and going, doors propped open, radios playing. There were blind spots everywhere, places where a small, quiet teenager could observe without being observed. Dani learned to read the rhythms of the airport. She learned which pilots tipped the fuel truck drivers, which maintenance crews cut corners, which jets got the thorough inspections, and which got the cursory once-overs. She learned the difference between turbine whine and compressor surge, between normal exhaust smell and the acrid tang of fuel residue where it shouldn't be. She learned by watching, by listening, by being invisible. And most importantly, she learned that her father had been right. Sometimes you can smell danger before you can see it. November 16th, 2024. 9:43 p.m. Dani was in her usual spot, a small clearing behind Hangar 7, where the ambient light from the tarmac didn't quite reach, but she could still see the taxi lanes. She'd fashioned a shelter from a refrigerator box, some plastic sheeting, and a tarp she'd found in a dumpster. It wasn't much, but it was hers. She was eating a slightly stale bagel and reading a water-damaged copy of The Count of Monte Cristo. A weird choice for a 15-year-old. But she'd found it in a little free library and had become obsessed with the idea of someone wrongfully imprisoned who escapes to take revenge on those who wronged him. Felt relevant. That's when she heard the engines. At this time of night, most of the traffic had died down. The flight schools were closed. The charter operations had finished their evening runs. But private jets, they operated on their own schedules. Rich people didn't wait for convenient departure times. Dani looked up from her book. A Gulfstream G650 was taxiing toward runway 27, a sleek, white beast of an aircraft, the kind that cost more than most people would earn in 10 lifetimes. Even in the dark, she could see it was pristine, freshly waxed, probably belonged to someone with worth measured in billions, not millions. The jet turned onto the taxiway, engines beginning to spool up for takeoff thrust. And that's when the smell hit her. That petroleum-sweet, acrid, wrong smell. The smell that said, fire before fire. The smell that said, run. The smell that had filled her father's shop in the seconds before he died. Dani's body moved before her brain caught up. She dropped her book. She vaulted the fence, ignoring the pain as the chain link dug into her palms. She sprinted across the grass median, her father's old work jacket flapping behind her like a cape. "Hey!" A security guard's voice, distant and confused. "Hey! You can't!" The Gulfstream's engines screamed louder. Through the cockpit windows, she could see the pilots going through their pre-takeoff checks. Through the passenger windows, she could see silhouettes, people in business attire, oblivious, probably, reviewing presentations or sipping champagne. Dani hit the tarmac at a full sprint. She was small, but she'd been running from danger for 2 years. She was fast, and she was motivated by something beyond rational thought, the kind of instinct that makes mothers lift cars off their children, that makes soldiers throw themselves on grenades. The smell was getting stronger. She could see it now, a faint shimmer of heat distortion near the left engine intake. Something burning inside the cowling, something that shouldn't be burning, something that was about to become catastrophic. "Stop!" she screamed. "Stop the plane!" But jet engines at takeoff thrust are louder than a teenage girl's voice. No one inside could hear her. The Gulfstream began to roll forward. Dani did the only thing she could think of. She ran directly into the path of the aircraft, waving her arms over her head like a madwoman. In the cockpit, Captain Robert Meyer, 22 years of experience, 12,000 flight hours, impeccable safety record, saw what looked like a child materialize out of the darkness directly in front of his aircraft. He did exactly what his training demanded. He aborted the takeoff. Engines spooled down, brakes engaged. The $65 million aircraft shuddered to a halt, 70 feet from where Dani stood, chest heaving, arms still raised. And that's when everything went to hell. Later, investigators would piece together what happened in the next 3 seconds, using security camera footage, eyewitness testimony, and forensic analysis. But in the moment, there was no time for analysis. There was only action. Second 1. The Gulfstream's left engine, starved of proper airflow due to a foreign object lodged in its intake, a specifically designed piece of magnesium alloy that had been placed there during a routine maintenance inspection 2 days prior, experienced catastrophic compressor failure. The engine didn't just fail, it disintegrated. Second 2. Shrapnel from the failed turbine punched through the engine cowling and ignited fuel that had been deliberately over-serviced in the wing tank. The explosion wasn't immediate. It was a rolling ignition, a wave of fire that spread faster than thought. Second 3. Dani saw the fireball bloom from the engine, just as the cockpit door opened and a man in a $1,000 suit stumbled down the air stairs, confused and angry, demanding to know why his flight had been aborted. She didn't think. She didn't calculate. She didn't consider that this man was probably someone important, someone powerful, someone whose time was worth more per second than she'd see in a year. She just ran. Dani hit Alexander Thornton, venture capitalist, net worth $4.7 billion, owner of Thornton Capital Partners, like a linebacker. All 127 pounds of homeless teenager colliding with 190 pounds of surprise billionaire. They went down in a tangle of limbs just as the fuel tank exploded. The blast wave rolled over them, heat and pressure and noise that turned the world into a hellscape of orange and black. Dani felt something sear across her left arm, felt the breath slam out of her lungs, felt her ears pop from the pressure change. But they were on the ground, below the worst of the blast. Behind them, the Gulfstream G650 burned like a funeral pyre. When Dani's vision cleared, seconds, minutes, she found herself on her back on the tarmac, Alexander Thornton half on top of her, both of them staring up at flames that reached 30 feet into the humid Miami night. Fire trucks were screaming in the distance, security vehicles converging, people shouting, and Dani, burned, terrified, shaking with adrenaline, looked into the eyes of the billionaire she'd just saved and said the only thing that came to mind, "I told you to stop." Alexander Thornton, whose typical Tuesday involved moving millions with a phone call, whose life was measured in market caps and quarterly returns, whose universe revolved around calculated risk and optimal outcomes, stared at this tiny, fierce creature who'd just saved his life. "Who?" he managed to croak. "The hell are you?" Dani woke up in a hospital bed she couldn't afford, in a room she didn't remember entering, with a bandage wrapped around her left forearm that felt like it was made of fire. Second-degree burns, the nurse explained. Not life-threatening, but painful. She'd need to keep it clean, change the dressing daily, avoid infection. there'd be scarring. Where am I? Dani's voice came out scratchy, smoke damaged. Jackson Memorial. You've been here for 6 hours. The nurse, a middle-aged Haitian woman with kind eyes, checked Dani's vitals. You're lucky. That explosion could have killed you. Memory flooded back. The jet, the fire, the billionaire, the plane, the people on the plane. Everyone evacuated safely, thanks to you. The nurse smiled. You're a hero, sweetheart. Dani didn't feel like a hero. She felt like a homeless kid who'd done something stupid and was probably about to be arrested for trespassing, disrupting airport operations, and a dozen other charges she couldn't afford lawyers to fight. But what happened next wasn't arrest. What happened next was Alexander Thornton walking into her hospital room, still wearing the same suit, now rumpled and smoke-stained, flanked by 2 serious-looking men in dark jackets who screamed security. He looked at her for a long moment. Really looked. Not the way adults usually looked at homeless kids, with that mixture of pity and discomfort and relief that they weren't you. He looked at her like she was a person, like she mattered. You saved my life, he said simply. Dani didn't know what to say to that. You're welcome felt inadequate. No problem felt insane. So, she said nothing. Thornton pulled up a chair, casual, like he visited homeless teenagers in hospitals every day. I need to understand something. How did you know? The pilots didn't see anything. The maintenance logs were clean. The pre-flight inspection passed. How did a kid hiding behind a hangar know there was something wrong with my jet? And there it was. The question that had been lurking in Dani's mind since she'd woken up. The question she'd been avoiding because the answer opened doors to rooms full of pain. The smell, she said quietly. I smelled the fuel burning wrong. Smelled like something was wrong with the mixture, or something was burning that shouldn't be. You smelled it from behind a hangar? Thornton's voice carried no mockery, only curiosity. My father taught me. The words came out before she could stop them. He ran an auto shop, said you can diagnose most problems by smell before you even open the hood. Said your nose knows before your eyes do. Smart man. He's dead. Dani hadn't meant to say that either, but somehow, with this stranger who she'd saved from death, the truth felt easier than lies. Died in an explosion 4 years ago. Fuel line rupture, they said. But he'd been worried about something before. Said things weren't always what they seemed. Something changed in Thornton's expression. His eyes sharpened, focused. What was your father's name? Marcus Reeves. Why? Thornton exchanged a glance with one of his security men, a look that Dani couldn't interpret, but that made her stomach tighten. Because, Thornton said slowly, I don't believe in coincidences. And I especially don't believe in 2 fuel-related explosions happening to people in your orbit 4 years apart. What Dani didn't know, what almost no one outside of specialized federal agencies knew, was that Alexander Thornton wasn't just a billionaire. He was an obsessive. The kind of person who couldn't let mysteries sit unsolved, who picked at problems until they unraveled, who'd built his fortune not just on good investments, but on seeing patterns others missed. And he'd just been handed a pattern that made no sense. Private jets don't explode. Not modern ones. Not ones maintained to the exacting standards required by the FAA and insurance companies. The safety record of business aviation is extraordinary. Fatal accidents measured in single digits per year across thousands of operators. For a G650 to experience catastrophic engine failure on the ground before takeoff with fire, that wasn't mechanical failure, that was sabotage. But who would sabotage his jet, and why? More importantly, who would sabotage it in a way that was designed to look like an accident during takeoff, when it would be too late to abort, when everyone on board would die in a fireball? Thornton had enemies. You don't build a $4.7 billion fortune without making some. Competitors who'd lost deals, founders who resented his terms, executives he'd fired when companies underperformed. But attempted murder, that was a different category entirely. Unless unless it wasn't about him specifically. "Tell me about your father's shop," Thornton said to Dani. "Where was it? Who were his customers?" Dani frowned, confused by the change in direction. "Northwest 62nd. Small place. Mostly neighborhood customers. Some fleet work for local businesses." "Why?" "Fleet work," Thornton repeated. "Like what? Delivery companies, contractors?" "Yeah, and sometimes airport vehicles, maintenance trucks, fuel trucks, that kind of thing." The room went very quiet. "Airport vehicles," Thornton said softly. "From TMB?" "Sometimes." Daddy said airport work paid better, but it was inconsistent. He'd go months with nothing, then get 3 or 4 vehicles all at once. Thornton stood abruptly, pulling out his phone. "I need to make some calls. Dani, I want you to stay here. You're safe. The hospital bills are handled. But I need you to not talk to anyone about tonight. Not reporters, not police, not anyone, until I figure something out. Can you do that?" "I'm homeless," Dani said bluntly. "When I leave here, I'm going back to a cardboard box behind your airplane graveyard. I'm not exactly swimming in interview requests." Thornton stopped, turned, really looked at her again. "Not anymore, you're not," he said. What Alexander Thornton discovered over the next 72 hours would eventually lead to a federal investigation, congressional hearings, and a complete overhaul of small airport security protocols. But in those first 3 days, it was just him, his personal security team, and a growing sense of dread. Here's what they found. Marcus Reeves's accident in 2020 had been investigated by Miami-Dade Fire Rescue and closed as accidental. But when Thornton's people pulled the full case file, something that required connections and money that Dani's family hadn't possessed, they found anomalies. The fuel line that ruptured, installed 6 weeks before the explosion during a routine maintenance check. The inspector who signed off on the work, no longer with the company, address unknown. The fuel supplier, a small regional company that had gone bankrupt 8 months after the incident. Dead ends everywhere. Or what looked like dead ends, if you weren't obsessive enough to keep digging. Thornton hired a firm that specialized in cold case forensic analysis. They found 3 other accidental fuel-related fires at small businesses near TMB between 2019 and 2024. Not enough to trigger pattern recognition in overworked fire departments, but enough to raise questions if you were looking. A catering truck company that serviced private jets. Fire blamed on electrical short. A small parts supplier for aircraft maintenance. Fire blamed on improper chemical storage. A fuel testing laboratory that certified aviation fuel quality. Fire blamed on dropped cigarette. All businesses that worked with or around TMB. All businesses owned or operated by Black and Latino families. All businesses that had been acquired by larger companies within months of the fires, at prices well below market value. "Someone's been clearing competition," Thornton said to his head of security, a former FBI agent named Keisha Washington. "But it's not about the businesses themselves, it's about access." "Access to what?" "To the airport, to the infrastructure, to the supply chain." Thornton stared at the map on the wall of his Miami penthouse, TMB marked with a red pin, the location of each accident marked with yellow pins in a rough circle around it. What if someone's been systematically eliminating minority-owned businesses that work with the airport so they can replace them with companies they control? To what end? "I don't know yet, but my jet was sabotaged by someone with detailed knowledge of maintenance procedures and access to secure areas. That's not random. That's systemic." Keisha Washington, who'd spent 15 years investigating organized crime and domestic terrorism before going private, looked at the map and felt something cold settle in her stomach. "If you're right," she said slowly, "this isn't just about your jet. This is about every aircraft operating out of TMB. Maybe every small airport like it. And the only reason we know about it," Thornton said, "is because a homeless 15-year-old recognized the smell of sabotage and decided to do something suicidally brave." They looked at each other, both thinking the same thing. How many planes had they not caught? While Thornton investigated, Dani found herself in a weird limbo. She wasn't under arrest. The airport authority and FAA were too busy investigating the explosion to worry about a trespassing charge. She wasn't in foster care. No one had reported her to DCFS, perhaps because doing so would require explaining why a child was living undetected at an airport. She was simply between worlds. Thornton had checked her into a hotel near the hospital. Nothing fancy by his standards, but it had a bed that didn't crinkle when she moved, and a shower with unlimited hot water and a mini fridge that the staff kept stocked. Dani spent the first day just existing in the space, unable to believe it was real, waiting for someone to tell her it was a mistake and send her back to the street. On the second day, Thornton's assistant, a terrifyingly efficient woman named Patricia, who wore designer pantsuits and moved like she was late for 3 meetings simultaneously, brought her clothes. Real clothes, not second-hand stuff from donation bins. Jeans that fit. A warm jacket. Sneakers that didn't have holes. "Mr. Thornton wants to meet with you tomorrow," Patricia said. "He has some questions about your father." "Am I in trouble?" Patricia's expression softened slightly. "Honey, you just saved 11 lives and exposed what might be a major criminal conspiracy. The only trouble you're in is that you're about to become very famous, and Mr. Thornton is trying to delay that as long as possible to keep you safe." Famous. The word sat wrong in Dani's mouth. She didn't want to be famous. She wanted to be invisible. Fame meant attention, and attention meant vulnerability. But it was already too late. Someone had leaked cell phone footage of the explosion, grainy video showing a small figure tackling someone in a suit just before the fireball bloomed. The footage didn't show Dani's face clearly, but it showed enough. Local news had run it. Then national news. Then social media had done what social media does. It went viral. So Gulfstream hero was trending. News outlets were calling her the mystery girl who saved a billionaire. Reporters were camped outside TMB. Someone had created a GoFundMe that had already raised $180,000. Dani watched it all from her hotel room with a growing sense of unreality. 24 hours ago, she was homeless and invisible. Now she was a hashtag. She thought about her father's words. Sometimes things ain't what they seem. Nothing about any of this seemed real. Alexander Thornton arrived at Dani's hotel room at 9 a.m. sharp, carrying coffee and bagels and a folder thick enough to double as a weapon. "We need to talk," he said, without preamble. "And I need you to tell me everything you remember about your father's work in the months before he died." So Dani told him. She told him about the late nights at the shop, about the conversations she wasn't supposed to overhear, about the way her father started checking the locks twice and looking over his shoulder. She told him about the new customers who'd started coming in, men in clean work clothes who paid cash and didn't want receipts. She told him about the argument she'd overheard between her father and someone on the phone. "He kept saying, 'I'm not going to lie about it,'" Dani remembered. "I don't care how much you pay me. I'm not signing off on work I didn't do." And then the person on the other end must have threatened him because Daddy got real quiet and said, "You do what you gotta do, but I'm not falsifying maintenance records." Thornton went very still. Maintenance records? For what? "I don't know. I was 11. I didn't understand." Dani felt the old guilt resurface, the child's magical thinking that if she'd just paid more attention, asked more questions, maybe she could have saved him. "Dani." Thornton's voice was gentle, but firm. "Listen to me. What happened to your father wasn't your fault. But I think he discovered something he shouldn't have, and someone killed him for it." The word, killed, not died, not accident, hung in the air between them. "Someone murdered my daddy?" "I think so. And I think they tried to kill me for the same reason, or something related. And I think they're going to keep killing until someone stops them." Thornton opened the folder. Inside were photographs, documents, diagrams. "These are all the accidents I've found so far. 9 total, over 5 years, all connected to TMB or similar small airports. All minority-owned businesses, all conveniently destroyed, with ownership transferred shortly after. He spread the photos across the hotel room desk. And here's the other pattern. Every accident happened 2 to 6 weeks after the business received new equipment or a maintenance inspection from a company called Regency Aviation Services. Regency does aircraft maintenance, fueling system inspections, safety audits. They're based in Atlanta but operate across the Southeast. You think they're sabotaging businesses? I think they're doing more than that. I think they're building a network of controlled businesses around small airports, and they're eliminating anyone who won't play along. Thornton pulled out another document, a corporate filing. Regency is a subsidiary of a larger company called Titan Operations Group. And Titan has been quietly acquiring small aviation services companies for the past decade. Why? That, Thornton said grimly, is what we're going to find out. When you're a billionaire, you have resources ordinary people don't. Alex Thornton could afford to hire forensic accountants who specialized in corporate malfeasance, private investigators who'd worked major white-collar crime, and enough lawyers to fill a corporate boardroom. What he couldn't do was make the federal government move faster. The FAA had opened an investigation into the G650 explosion. The FBI had been notified, but investigations take time, especially when you're trying to prove a pattern across multiple jurisdictions and years. Thornton didn't have time. Because if he was right, there were dozens of other businesses in Titan's crosshairs, dozens of other potential victims who didn't know they were targets. So, he did what billionaires do. He built his own investigation. The forensic trail took 3 weeks to compile. What they found was extraordinary in its scope and audacity. Titan Operations Group, it turned out, was a private equity fund specializing in aviation support services. The unglamorous but essential businesses that kept small airports running. Fueling, maintenance, catering, parts supply, even things like runway lighting maintenance and weather monitoring. Over 15 years, Titan had acquired 127 companies across 34 states. Most acquisitions were straightforward purchases, but 23 of them, 17%, had come after incidents that depressed the business value. Fires, explosions, severe regulatory violations that appeared out of nowhere. Insurance claims that bankrupted small operators. The pattern was clear, but proving deliberate sabotage was different. That required evidence of intent, of coordination, of a systematic plan. That's where Marcus Reeves came back into the story. One of Thornton's investigators, a tenacious former IRS agent named Raymond Liu, found something that everyone else had missed. Marcus Reeves had filed a complaint with the FAA 6 weeks before his death. The complaint was vague, probably intentionally so. It referenced irregularities in maintenance documentation and pressure to certify work not performed, but didn't name specific individuals or companies. It had been assigned to an inspector, logged, and apparently forgotten, buried in the avalanche of paperwork the FAA processes annually. But the timing was damning. 6 weeks after Marcus filed that complaint, he was dead. They killed him because he wouldn't play along, Keisha Washington said, staring at the FAA report. He was supposed to sign off on maintenance he didn't do, and when he refused, they eliminated him. And made it look like an accident, Thornton added, which means someone at Titan has expertise in creating plausible disasters. Someone who understands fuel systems, electrical systems, industrial accidents. Someone who's probably still working for them, Dani said quietly. Everyone turned to look at her. She'd been sitting silently in the corner of Thornton's office, listening to the investigation unfold around her. He'd insisted she be present for all the meetings, partly to keep her safe, partly because she'd earned it, and partly because she kept asking questions that cut through the noise. "What do you mean?" Thornton asked. "You said there were 23 incidents. That's not something you outsource. That's specialized knowledge. That's someone who knows how to make equipment fail in ways that look random." Dani stood, walked to the evidence board they'd constructed. My daddy knew maintenance inside and out, and he could smell when something was wrong. Whoever's doing this has the same knowledge, just inverted. They know how to make things go wrong in exactly the right way. An engineer, Liu said slowly, or a mechanic with engineering knowledge. More than that, Washington added, someone with access to multiple sites, someone who travels, someone whose presence at an airport or maintenance facility wouldn't raise suspicion. Thornton smiled, not a happy smile, but the smile of a hunter who just found the scent. A safety inspector, someone who does audits and compliance checks, someone who's supposed to be looking for problems. They all stared at the evidence board, pieces clicking into place. Find me every safety inspector who's worked for Regency or Titan in the past decade, Thornton said. Cross-reference with the locations and dates of every incident. Someone's name is going to appear too many times to be coincidence. It took 2 days. The name that appeared on 19 of the 23 incident investigations was Robert Chen. Not related to the Mr. Chen who'd helped Dani survive on the streets, just a coincidence of surnames. This Robert Chen was 47 years old, graduate of Georgia Tech, with a degree in aerospace engineering, 22 years in aviation safety, impeccable credentials, and he'd been present at or conducted inspections of every business that later experienced a catastrophic accident. That can't be a coincidence, Washington said, staring at Chen's employee photo. But we need more than correlation. What they needed was a smoking gun. What they needed was evidence that Chen had deliberately caused the accidents, not just been unfortunate enough to inspect businesses that later failed. What they needed was the sabotage device. After the G6-150 explosion, the NTSB had recovered the engine. Buried in the wreckage of the failed turbine, investigators had found it, a piece of magnesium alloy, precisely machined, designed to lodge in the compressor stage where it would cause maximum damage at high RPM. It hadn't been there during the previous maintenance inspection. It had been placed deliberately recently by someone with access to the engine cowling. Thornton's security team had copies of all the maintenance logs for his jet. They knew exactly who'd touched it in the weeks before the attempted takeoff. And there, 3 days before the explosion, an unscheduled maintenance inspection, performed by Regency Aviation Services. Inspector Robert Chen. We have him, Thornton said. We have correlation, Washington corrected. We need confession or direct evidence, and we need to know if he's working alone, or if this goes higher. It goes higher, Dani said. Everyone looked at her again. It has to. You said Titan has acquired over 100 companies. You said this has been happening for 15 years. One guy can't maintain that kind of operation alone. Someone's coordinating this. Someone's selecting targets, arranging acquisitions, cleaning up the aftermath. She was right, of course. But proving it meant somehow getting Robert Chen to talk, or catching him in the act. If you want to catch a saboteur, you need bait. Thornton had his team identify 3 minority-owned aviation businesses that fit Titan's targeting pattern. Small operators at mid-sized airports, profitable but not wealthy, with infrastructure Titan didn't yet control. One in Jacksonville, one in Charlotte, one in Raleigh-Durham. Then he did something clever. He became a customer. Through shell companies and intermediaries, Thornton arranged for all 3 businesses to receive substantial new contracts, the kind of contracts that would make them attractive acquisition targets, the kind of contracts that would require maintenance upgrades, facility inspections, insurance reviews, and then they waited. It took 3 weeks. But Regency Aviation Services reached out to all 3 companies, offering complimentary safety audits as part of their small business support program. 2 of the 3 accepted. Inspector assigned, Robert Chen. We need to catch him placing the device, Washington said. Not just being there, actually sabotaging equipment. They chose the Charlotte location, a fuel testing facility called Piedmont Aviation Services, run by a man named Jerome Davis, who'd served 20 years in the Air Force before starting his business. Davis was brought into the plan after extensive vetting. He was furious, professional, and absolutely committed to catching the person who might have been targeting businesses like his. The facility was wired with covert Cameras, not security cameras, which Chen would expect and potentially avoid, but hidden devices disguised as electrical fixtures, sprinkler heads, even coffee makers. Every angle covered, multiple redundancy. Chen arrived on a Tuesday morning, carrying his inspection kit and wearing the confident expression of someone who'd done this many times before. Thornton, Washington, and Dani watched via live feed from a van 2 blocks away. FBI agents were on standby, ready to move on Washington's signal. For 3 hours, Chen conducted what appeared to be a legitimate inspection. He checked fuel storage protocols. He reviewed maintenance logs. He tested sample purity. He was thorough, professional, utterly convincing. Dani watched him work with growing frustration. "He's not going to do it," she said. "He knows something's wrong." "He has to," Thornton said. "This is textbook target, recent contract, increased value, owner who fits the profile. If he doesn't sabotage this one—" "Wait," Washington said. "Look." On screen, Chen had moved to the fuel quality testing station, a complex piece of equipment that analyzed contamination, water content, and chemical composition. He glanced around casually, then set down his inspection tablet. When he picked it up again, something was different. His hand had been inside the equipment housing for maybe 3 seconds. "Did you see that?" Dani asked. "Replay it," Washington said to the tech operating the feeds. They watched it again, slowed down. Chen's hand going into the housing, a brief, practiced movement, hand coming out, the whole thing taking less than 5 seconds. "What did he place?" Thornton asked. They wouldn't know for certain until they could examine the equipment, but it fit the pattern. A small device, quickly placed, designed to cause failure later in a way that would seem like natural equipment malfunction. "That's probable cause," Washington said, reaching for her phone. "FBI's moving in." Robert Chen didn't run. When FBI agents converged on the facility 20 minutes later, he was in Jerome Davis's office, finishing his inspection report, calm as Sunday morning. He didn't resist arrest. He didn't deny being there. He simply requested his lawyer and went silent. But the device spoke for him. What Chen had placed inside the fuel testing equipment was elegant in its simplicity, a small titanium capsule containing a catalytic agent that would, over the course of 4 to 6 weeks, slowly contaminate fuel samples, causing test results to show dangerous levels of water and particulate matter. The contamination would be real. The equipment would genuinely produce unsafe readings, forcing Piedmont to shut down for investigation and remediation. During that shutdown, when the business was bleeding money and facing regulatory scrutiny, Titan would make an offer to acquire them at a steep discount. It was brilliant, and it was damning, but Chen wasn't talking. And without his testimony, they couldn't prove. The conspiracy reached beyond him. That's when Dani had an idea. "I want to talk to him," Dani said. They were back in Thornton's office, now more war room than workplace, walls covered with evidence, timelines, corporate structures. The FBI had Chen in custody, but the investigation was stalling. Chen's lawyer had advised complete silence. Titan Operations Group had issued statements about being shocked and dismayed by their contractors' alleged actions and was cooperating fully while maintaining they had no knowledge of any impropriety. It was a classic corporate dodge. Let the individual take the fall, claim institutional ignorance, settle civil suits quietly, move on. Thornton had faced enough corporate warfare to recognize the play, but he also knew it was working. Without Chen flipping, without evidence connecting his actions to Titan's leadership, the conspiracy would stay hidden. "Absolutely not," Washington said immediately. "Chen is in federal custody. You're a minor, and even if we could arrange it, what would you possibly say to him?" "I'd ask him about my father." The room went quiet. "I've been thinking," Dani continued. "Chen was at my father's shop. I remember him. I didn't know his name, but I remember seeing an inspector there, maybe 3 weeks before the explosion. Clean work clothes, clipboard, official looking. Daddy was annoyed about it, said he'd just passed an inspection 6 months before and didn't need another one. Thornton leaned forward. You're sure? I'm sure I saw someone who looked like his photo, and I'm sure my father was suspicious of him. That's not enough to charge him with your father's murder, Washington said gently. And even if it was, confronting him with that wouldn't be about charges, Dani interrupted. Would be about making him see me as a person, not a problem. He's been killing people's parents, destroying families, for 15 years. Maybe he's managed to not think about that. Maybe he needs to be reminded. It was Thornton who understood what she was really asking for. You want him to confess. I want him to tell the truth. And I think he will, if the right person asks. Why would you be the right person? Because I'm Marcus Reeves's daughter. Because I saved lives instead of destroying them. Because I'm everything his victims were before he took their futures away. Dani's voice was steady, certain. And because if he has any conscience left at all, he won't be able to look at me and stay silent. It was a long shot. But then again, so had been a 15-year-old homeless girl saving a billionaire from an exploding jet. FBI policy is very clear about interactions between suspects and civilians, especially minors. But FBI policy is also flexible when billionaires with excellent lawyers make convincing arguments about victims' rights and the therapeutic value of confrontation. 2 weeks after Chen's arrest, Dani sat across a metal table from the man who'd killed her father. Chen looked different than his photo, greyer, smaller, diminished by orange prison scrubs and the weight of certainty. He'd been informed this meeting was voluntary, that he could refuse, that his lawyer was present. He'd agreed anyway, maybe curiosity, maybe conscience. My name is Dani Reeves, she said. You killed my father. Chen's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes. I don't know what you're talking about. Marcus Reeves, auto shop on Northwest 62nd Street in Miami. 4 years ago, there was an explosion. Fuel line rupture, they called it. But you were there 3 weeks before. You inspected his shop, and you placed something that would make it explode. I was a safety inspector. I inspected lots of... You remember him, Dani interrupted. I can see it in your face. You remember because he wouldn't cooperate. He wouldn't sign off on maintenance he didn't do. He wouldn't falsify records. So you killed him. Chen's lawyer started to speak, but Chen held up a hand. He looked at Dani, really looked, and she saw something break behind his eyes. How old are you? He asked. 15. So you were 11 when you murdered my father. Yes. The word, murder, stated plainly, without emotion, seemed to hit Chen like a physical blow. It wasn't supposed to be murder, he said quietly. It was supposed to be business. It was supposed to be just what? Just destroying businesses, just ruining lives, just making it look like accidents. Dani leaned forward. 23 families. You destroyed 23 families. And for what? So some corporation could buy their businesses cheap. You don't understand how this works. Then explain it to me. Explain how my father had to die. And maybe it was the way she said it. Not angry, not crying, just asking for understanding. But Chen started talking. He talked about how Titan had hired him 15 years ago, after he'd been let go from a major airline following budget cuts. How they'd offered him triple his previous salary to conduct enhanced compliance inspections at targeted locations. How he hadn't asked too many questions at first because the money was good and his wife was sick and they had medical bills. He talked about the first incident, a small fuel depot in Louisiana, owned by a Vietnamese immigrant family. How he'd been told to find violations that would force a shutdown. How he'd planted evidence of contamination and watched the family lose everything. I told myself they'd be fine, Chen said, that they'd get insurance payouts, that Titan would give them fair value. I told myself I was just doing a job. But that's not what happened. No, Titan would drag out litigation until the families couldn't afford lawyers anymore. They'd lowball settlements. They'd acquire assets for pennies on the dollar. And then they'd send me to the next target. Why didn't you stop? Chen laughed, a broken, bitter sound. Because by the time I understood what I was really doing, I was complicit. Because they made it clear that if I talked, I'd go to prison and my family would be destroyed. Because I was a coward. My father wasn't. No, your father refused to cooperate. I went to his shop 3 times, trying to convince him to sign off on maintenance records for airport vehicles, records that said they'd been properly serviced when they hadn't been. He wouldn't do it, so Titan ordered me to eliminate the problem. To kill him. To cause an accident. That's how we termed it. 'Cause an accident. Like that made it different. Chen's voice was barely a whisper now. I placed a defective fuel line in his shop. I knew it would rupture under pressure. I knew there were ignition sources nearby. I knew he'd be there when it happened. Dani felt something ice-cold settle in her chest. Did he suffer? The report said death was instantaneous. That's not what I asked. Chen met her eyes. I don't know. I wasn't there. I never stayed to watch. But you went to 23 locations over 15 years. You planted 23 devices. You destroyed 23 families. You killed how many people? 7, Chen whispered. 7 people died in the incidents. Your father was the first. The number hung in the air like smoke. Who ordered it? Dani asked. Who at Titan told you to kill my father? Chen's lawyer started to object, but Chen waved him off again. What's it matter? I'm going to prison for life either way. It matters, Dani said fiercely, because they're still doing it, because they tried to kill 11 more people on that jet, because they're going to keep destroying families until someone stops them. Chen looked at her for a long moment. This 15-year-old girl, who'd lost everything, who'd survived homelessness, who'd saved lives instead of destroying them. Everything he'd failed to be. The orders came from the VP of Strategic Acquisitions, he said finally. Marcus Holloway. He'd identify targets. I'd create the accidents. The acquisitions team would move in. It was systematic, coordinated, and Holloway reported directly to Titan's CEO, Derek Vance. Can you prove that? I kept records. Insurance policy, I thought. Something to protect me if Titan ever tried to burn me. Email chains, payment records, even audio recordings of planning meetings. Chen smiled grimly. It's all in a safety deposit box in Atlanta. Box 847 at Peachtree Trust Bank. My lawyer has the key. Chen's lawyer went very pale. You're giving this to us? Dani asked. I'm giving it to you, to Marcus Reeves's daughter, who grew up without a father because I was too weak to say no. Chen's voice cracked. I can't bring him back. I can't undo what I did, but I can make sure the people who ordered it don't get away. With Chen's testimony and his documentary evidence, the FBI moved fast. Marcus Holloway was arrested at his Buckhead office, trying to wipe his computer drives when federal agents arrived. Derek Vance was picked up at a conference in Dubai and extradited 3 weeks later. 12 other Titan employees were indicted on charges ranging from conspiracy to commit murder to wire fraud to corporate espionage. The evidence was overwhelming. Email chains discussing target elimination, payment records showing cash bonuses to Chen after each successful incident. Even a PowerPoint presentation titled Market Clearing Through Strategic Asset Stress Testing that laid out the entire sabotage scheme in corporate euphemisms. Titan Operations Group collapsed within 6 months. Civil suits from victims' families totaled over $3 billion. The company declared bankruptcy. Its assets were liquidated. But money doesn't bring back the dead. Dani testified at Chen's sentencing hearing. She stood in federal court, in clothes that fit and a future that existed, and told the judge about her father, about growing up without him, about years in foster care and homelessness, about smelling danger and choosing to act instead of looking away. Robert Chen took my father from me, she said. He took 7 lives and destroyed dozens of families. But he also made a choice in the end to tell the truth, to help stop the people who ordered him to kill. That doesn't forgive what he did. Nothing can. but it means something. Chen got life in prison with possibility of parole after 30 years. Holloway and Vance got 40 years each, no parole. The others received sentences ranging from 15 to 25 years. Dani was 16 when the last of the trials concluded. She was also, thanks to that GoFundMe and a substantial financial gift from Alexander Thornton, who insisted it wasn't charity but compensation for services rendered as a security consultant, not homeless anymore. Miami Executive Airport, 9:47 p.m. 3 years to the day after the explosion. Dani Reeves, now 18 years old, stood on the tarmac where she'd saved 11 lives. She was taller now, her hair pulled back in a professional ponytail, wearing a Thornton Security Solutions jacket with her name embroidered over the pocket. Next to her stood Alexander Thornton, watching a Gulfstream G700, his replacement jet, thoroughly and repeatedly inspected, prepare for departure. "You sure about this?" he asked. Dani smiled. "I'm sure. MIT Aerospace Engineering Program, full scholarship, starting in the fall. Someone needs to make sure jets don't explode. Might as well be me." "Your father would be proud." "I hope so." Dani touched the scar on her left arm, permanent reminder of the night everything changed. "I think he'd also want me to remember what this is really about, not just engineering, not just safety, but protecting people, especially people who can't protect themselves." Thornton nodded. Over the past 3 years, he'd learned that lesson from her. He'd transformed his security company to focus not just on protecting the wealthy but on investigating corporate malfeasance, supporting whistleblowers, and helping victims of schemes like Titans. It wasn't altruism. It was good business. But it was also the right thing to do. "The memorial dedication is tomorrow," he said. 2 p.m. The Marcus Reeves Aviation Safety Foundation. Funded by settlements from the Titan lawsuits, it provided scholarships for minorities entering aviation careers, supported independent safety research, and offered legal assistance to small businesses facing suspicious accidents. 7 names were engraved on the memorial wall. Marcus Reeves's name was first. "I'll be there," Dani said. They stood in silence for a moment, watching the jet prepare for departure. Normal operations, safe operations, people going about their lives, protected by systems and safeguards, and, occasionally, by brave young women who trusted their instincts and refused to look away from danger. "Can I ask you something?" Dani said. "Always. That night, after I tackled you, after the explosion, you didn't have to help me. You could have said thank you and walked away. You could have let me disappear back into the streets. Why didn't you?" Thornton considered the question. "Honestly, at first it was just curiosity. How did you know? What made you run toward danger instead of away? I wanted to understand. And later, I realized you'd given me a gift. Not just saving my life, though obviously that was significant." He smiled. "But showing me that courage doesn't require resources or power or privilege. Just the willingness to act when action is needed. I'd spent 20 years building an empire, and a homeless 15-year-old taught me the most important lesson I'd ever learned. Which was that we're responsible for each other, that someone has to smell the danger and shout the warning and run toward the fire, and that it doesn't matter whether you're a billionaire or a girl sleeping in a cardboard box. What matters is whether you do something when the moment comes." Dani felt tears prick her eyes, but didn't let them fall. "He's really gone, isn't he? My dad, even with Chen in prison, even with the justice, he's still gone." "Yes," Thornton said gently. "But what he taught you, what he gave you, that's forever. That's how he lives on." They watched the Gulfstream taxi to the runway, engines spooling up, powerful and clean, no acrid smell, no hidden sabotage, just metal and engineering and human ingenuity functioning exactly as designed. The jet lifted into the Miami night sky, climbing towards stars that Dani would soon study in college, toward a future that 3 years ago had seemed impossible. She thought about her father's words. "Your nose knows before your eyes do." Trust that feeling. She thought about the 3 seconds that changed everything. She thought about all the families who'd never got justice, all the accidents that were really murders, all the victims who stayed invisible because no one was brave enough or angry enough or desperate enough to expose the truth. And she made a promise to the night, to the memory of Marcus Reeves, to the girl she'd been sleeping behind Hangar 7. She would spend her life making sure that planes stayed safe, that families stayed whole, that when danger came, and it always would, someone would be there to smell it, recognize it, and run toward it instead of away. 3 seconds can change everything. But what you do with the rest of your life, that's what really matters.